September 2, 1944. The Pacific War raged at its peak. In the skies above the Bonin Islands, American bombers streaked towards their targets. Among them was a young pilot, George Herbert Walker Bush, just 20 years old. That day, he would narrowly escape death and a fate darker than anything he could imagine. 9 American airmen went down near the island of Chichijima. One survived. The others were captured, tortured, executed, and some were eaten. This is the true story of Chichijima Incident, a tale of horror, cannibalism, and silence, hidden for decades in sealed files and whispered testimony. A story absent from the history books until now. Chichijima is a part of the Bonin Islands, also called the Ogasawara Islands, located roughly 1,000 kilometers, about 620 miles south of Tokyo. Though small and remote, the island was a fortress. It housed radar installations, bunkers, heavy artillery, and one of the most critical radio communication stations in the Pacific. From here, Japanese forces could coordinate fleets and monitor Allied naval movements across vast stretches of ocean. For the United States, silencing Chichijima's communications was vital. During late 1944 and into early 1945, carrier-based aircraft struck the island to cripple its defenses. On September 2, 1944, 4 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers launched from the USS San Jacinto. Among the pilots was George H.W. Bush. His aircraft was hit by intense anti-aircraft fire. Flames engulfed the engine, yet Bush still managed to release his payload before ordering his crew to bail out. He parachuted into the sea, alone and adrift, on a life raft. Hours later, the submarine USS Finback surfaced and pulled him from the Pacific. He had survived. But the other airmen who went down that day, 8 of them in total, were captured by Japanese forces on Chichijima. For them, survival would mean something far more cruel. Months later, on February 18, 1945, during the assault on Iwo Jima, Avengers from the USS Bennington also attacked Chichijima. 2 captured crewmen, Grady York and James Dye, were executed on the island. They too became part of this dark chapter. The captured airmen were marched at gunpoint into the Chichijima's fortified interior. Beneath the jungle's canopy lay a maze of caves, tunnels, and bunkers carved into the volcanic rock. Here, in makeshift cells, the prisoners were bound, starved, and interrogated. The island was commanded by Major Yoshio Tachibana, a decorated officer whose devotion to the emperor was matched only by his ruthlessness. Supplies were dwindling, and Japanese morale was collapsing under relentless Allied bombardment. The American POWs were not treated as soldiers, but as expendable resources. Interrogations quickly escalated into torture. Prisoners were beaten, burned with cigarettes, and subjected to brutal mistreatment. Some were executed by beheading after being forced to dig their own graves. Yet for several of the captured men, death would not be the end. According to the testimony heard after the war, 4 of the captured airmen were executed and then cannibalized. Their flesh was not consumed out of starvation. Chichijima still had rice, vegetables, and fish. Instead, the killings were carried out as a grotesque ritual, an attempt to absorb strength from the enemy. Medical officers removed livers and thigh flesh from the bodies. Some testimony alleged that in at least one case, body parts were taken while the prisoner was still alive. The meat was grilled and served with sake and eaten by Tachibana and his senior officers. Witnesses described these acts during war tribunals, making clear that they were not random atrocities, but organized, deliberate acts of domination. The Japanese officers called these macabre feasts a way to inspire courage, but for the victims, it was the ultimate desecration, robbed of dignity in both life and death. George H.W. Bush's story could have ended the same way, had he drifted closer to shore. He too might have been captured, executed, and consumed. Instead, he lived, going on to serve as a congressman, CIA director, vice president, and eventually the 41st President of the United States. In later years, Bush admitted to survivor's guilt. He recalled watching his plane engulfed in flames, bailing out over the ocean, and floating helplessly as enemy shores loomed nearby. He often spoke with solemn reverence about the man who didn't come home. The shadows of Chichijima haunted him all his life. After Japan's surrender, the Allied occupation forces began investigating atrocities. At first, reports of cannibalism were dismissed as rumors, but testimony, medical records, and confessions revealed the unthinkable truth. In August 1946, Major Tachibana and 11 others were tried before a US Navy commission on Guam. Because international law did not explicitly address cannibalism, the charges focused on murder and the prevention of honorable burial. Witnesses recounted how flesh was prepared and eaten. Some defendants broke down in tears, others insisted they were following orders. Tachibana and several of his officers were sentenced to death by hanging. Others received long prison sentences. The Chichijima Incident became one of the most infamous war crimes cases of the Pacific Theater. For decades, the Chichijima Incident remained obscure. While some reports surfaced in the press in 1946, the full details were buried in war crimes archives, too gruesome and politically sensitive to reach a wider audience. It wasn't until 2003, when author James Bradley published his book Flyboys, that the world finally confronted the full scope of the atrocity. Bradley uncovered tribunal transcripts, interviewed surviving witnesses, and pieced together the truth. For the families of the lost airmen, the revelations brought both heartbreak and closure. At last, they knew what happened to their sons and brothers, even if the truth was almost too terrible to bear. Today, Chichijima is quiet. Tourists visit its coral reefs. Birds sing across its volcanic hills. But beneath the soil, the memory of 1944 and 1945 still lingers. 8 American airmen died not as soldiers in battle, but as victims of ritualized murder. Their story reminds us of war's darkest depths, how the line between humanity and monstrosity can collapse under desperation and fanaticism, and how even in paradise, the shadows of hell can linger forever. This was the Chichijima Incident, and this is ReaperFiles. Thank you for watching. Stay curious, stay cautious. Until next time on ReaperFiles.